People stood sometimes.
Oh, cool.
Yes, my old job
I'm not in it.
Chambers for a couple of months.
Oh,
There's always
there.
applications, but that hasn't happened here in my time yet, so just kind of
Okay,
surprised.
Madam Chair, we can begin in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order and begin with the land acknowledgement statement. On Tuesday, December 5th, 2023, we acknowledge that this sacred land on which Smiths Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We are also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smiths Falls. We are mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. First item of business is the approval of the agenda as circulated. Would someone move that we approve it?
I'd like to approve it, but could I add something to it?
Yes, please.
I'd like to discuss downtown signage.
Where should we put that into the agenda, do you think?
Maybe 5 of the priority issues.
After all those other things, or do you want to talk about it in conjunction with the downtown core design guidelines?
Yes, sure.
Can we, is that all right?
If that
Can we do
that
that?
works.
That's all right, Mary? It would be item 2 then, and the others would move down?
Okay.
Yes, so Richard's only going to be here for the
Right.
He's for the original presentation. So if he's going to be staying, then if that's related to the design provisions, then it would certainly make sense to join it next to that section of the agenda.
All right. Any other changes to the agenda? Okay, would someone move that we adopt the agenda? Jenny, and a seconder, Lorraine. Thank you. All in favor? Approved. I didn't write that down there, so I'll just have to remember. Okay, adoption of minutes is the next item of business, which you have received from the meeting of November 7th.
You want to move her in second?
Yes, Lorraine will move that we adopt the minutes, and the seconder, Chris, seconds it. Any discussion of the minutes or anything to be amended? No? All in favor of approving the minutes then? Thank you. Passed. Disclosure of monetary interest, anyone? No, hearing none. We'll move on to the priority issues then. The first one is the report that Richard's going to present to us on the draft downtown core design guidelines update.
Okay.
For Richard.
So the downtown core design guidelines at a high level really just speaks to the town's goal to create a framework where developers and landowners, as well as I guess anyone in town who lives in downtown core, have the ability to design beautiful spaces in our downtown core. So that relates to the existing buildings as well as infill developments. Now, with respect to the committee, the downtown guidelines are trying to do is they're using the existing architecture, which varies, as a framework to create more buildings in the downtown core that relate to the downtown core design guidelines. So the guidelines recognize the unique heritage context of downtown core, as well as the overlapping architectural styles. Building piers and streetscapes that define this important place, and support treatments that are complementary to the unique context of each building. New and infill developments should coexist with and work with the established character of their surroundings. The draft guidelines support the sympathetic and appropriate restoration and enhancement of its architecturally and historically significant features on these buildings. So the guidelines are broken into 3 main components. First, it talks about the application of the guidelines, which would be for landowners and business owners, anyone who has a desire to create in the downtown core. And then it moves into the context where it looks at the architecture as well as the land use context for the downtown core. And then it goes into specific details about different elements of buildings that could be improved based on design considerations in the guidelines.
Okay, we have all received the entire package, the guidelines that we were to review before the meeting. So do people have questions for Richard or comments?
I hadn't seen it till just now. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I do.
Yay.
The part about, let me see, I'll find the right page first.
A lot of pages on first.
Pages 6 and 7, where the architecture is discussed.
Yep.
So on page 6, it says, while many different styles of architecture can be found in Smith Falls, the Edwardian Classicism, Beaux Arts, and Art Deco, 3 styles are the most prominent seen in the downtown core. But then they're not described. It says that the ones that are described are Italianate, Renaissance Revival, and mid-century modern. So can you explain why?
The disconnect?
Yeah, it's a disconnect to me, yeah.
Well, the challenge was, I guess, in writing the report, the research I found highlighted those as the architectural themes in the downtown core, but then in terms of finding examples, it's a bit challenging. So I could revise the guidelines to reflect, I guess, what was found as opposed to what was researched.
Yes, and so it's the Italianate style is really obvious. I mean, the Washburn block,
Right.
the whole block, and also the isn't the Hotel Rideau Italianate commercial as well?
Victorian.
Okay, never mind that. But also there's the Second Empire, French Second Empire, on the other side of Beckwith, opposite the Washburn block. That's quite prominent as well. The the granite block where Pizza is.
Oh, that little face right there, the corner?
Well, yes, the corner, and then the streetscape on Beckwith as it goes down, the buildings that are adjoined, they're
Right.
French Second Empire. So I just wondered why it talks about 3 styles most prominent and then doesn't elaborate on them.
You're right. I'll make that as a comment to improve for the future.
Yes.
Thank you. I think it would be good to pick your brain, actually.
Hmm?
It would be good to pick your brain, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah.
And it would be, I guess, of interest to me, what we're going to be recommending and, allowing. And the other thing is that I want to talk about tonight about the signage is the council of the day is giving money for signage and so on. But if we, the Heritage Committee, we don't have a guideline for what kind of signs, it's going to be not abiding by the design that's there now. Like, I think there's already some signs that certainly don't fit what downtown should be like.
I know currently that we're looking to create harmony between the 2 documents. So when the sign by law is passed, there will definitely be some overlap between the 2 to make sure that they're reflecting the same thing.
Yes, that was going to be my next question. And also, I would assume that we'll overlap with the district plan that comes out when we get around to the Heritage Conservation District and the district plan. Yes, please, Carl, help me out.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. That's correct. So there's a number of reasons why we're proposing some refreshing the downtown core design guidelines, and one of the things we heard and was picked up by the consultants who drafted our community improvement plan was that there was a little bit of subjectivity and uncertainty in the design guidelines that we had in the past. So we're looking to refresh that, go through that, provide some more graphics, some more details, a little bit more updated language, focus more on a greater focus on environmental sustainability in design as well. But We're at this point we have a draft. We're reviewing it with the Municipal Heritage Committee. Obviously, there's a lot of relevance in what's proposed in that document and what the MHC's interest is. We're also reviewing it with a couple of other committees and proposing to bring it to council in January, where we're hoping it gets launched around the time we launch the next year's community improvement plan. So when the downtown core design guidelines are approved, these are recommendations, they're guidances, and when somebody is looking to make an application for the community improvement plan for a sign or for some sort of other facade improvement, clear and detailed design guidelines will help that applicant as well as staff evaluate what's a good proposal, what's good practices, certainly on heritage buildings, the best practices for heritage conservation should be upheld. So that's why we're doing it right now. As you mentioned, we are in the process of initiating a heritage conservation district. And in time, once that process is concluded and may come accompanied with formal requirements, a more regulatory approach, then we can assess where the downtown core design guidelines should be used and what would be, we'll figure out where the fit is. But I don't think what we're amending right now may not be exactly what's before us 5 years from now, based on some of the work that's coming down the pipeline.
So this isn't a brand new document then, or is it?
It's design guidelines. Design guidelines were approved by council, I believe, in 2014. There's a lot of very good content in them. So this takes a lot of that and adds a little bit of information, adds a little bit of clarification, and Richard can perhaps speak to how they've evolved. But this is intended as an update on the 2014 downtown core design guidelines that have been approved by council, and from which we're seeking feedback from MHC and others. Richard, did you want to speak a little bit to the changes?
Yes, I could. For example, so if you look at the table of contents, it talks about the land use context that wasn't there before. What was there before essentially just talked about design principles and building elements. And the original guidelines essentially were trying to articulate this concept of a traditional feel for the downtown core, but it was not really using enough explanation as to what that meant. So they use concepts like harmony and sympathetic, but for the common person, how would you understand what it means to be harmonious with the built environment? So there was little pictures to explain what those terminology meant, and so from a layperson perspective, it wasn't very applicable. Mm-hmm. So the guidelines essentially was to just give a little bit more context and a little bit more information, so that anyone who does not live here, does not understand the history of Smith Falls, can get a better sense of what it would be like to, say, improve their storefront. What would it mean to make it more sympathetic to the heritage for Smith Falls?
Okay. So Lorraine mentioned the sign bylaw and the issue of backlit signs.
Well, the sign bylaw that was brought forward a year ago, I think, most of the signs in there are very modern. Mm-hmm. I mean, and like flashy, and in my opinion, don't meet what should be met with a heritage building. Like, they just don't look heritage in any way. Now I'm understanding that this council is debating whether or not to have backlit lighting behind, which in my opinion is going to make that even worse. Mm. And I don't see how either of those things fit into what we're trying to do in this.
On page 21 in your document,
yes,
under lighting, it says backlit lighting and signage, as well as neon, electronic messages, or fluorescent lighting in windows must be avoided. It says, so isn't that in conflict with? Chris, can you speak to that from the point of view of the council meeting yesterday?
Jenny was there too.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah, no, I'm confused too, because there's definitely a difference between this document and the sign bylaw that was passed last night. So I'm not sure if that will mean an amendment.
Passed last night. And
So, so hopefully that means that maybe if this gets support, then that'll mean an amendment for the sign bylaw.
Okay.
But the sign bylaw as it stands now restricts definition of a cabinet sign downtown,
cabinet sign?
which would be any backlit sign that's rectangular. But if it's not rectangular, it's good to go.
So how does that fit into what we're looking at tonight? Like,
So this document definitely goes into a lot more detail and definitely puts, but its problem with this document is it's just a guideline, right? So this document suggesting, saying this is encouraged, that's encouraged, but
it's in conflict with what they just voted on, saying that they're going to do.
Mary has a comment.
Sorry, I'm going to stand for this.
Okay.
I am the author of a sign bylaw. I'd like to point out that in June of this year, a third revision of the sign bylaw was brought to council. Staff at that time were given 3 different directions. The first one was to consult with the Canadian Association for Signage. The second one was to revise the provisions with respect to maintenance. And the third was to balance staff workload so that we weren't processing regular minor deviations to the bylaw. So as everybody is aware, I was away for a period of time this year, but when I returned, I initiated discussions with the Signage Association, and Carl and I met with 4 different levels of signage associations at the beginning of November. So we met with a local sign developer, the Ontario Signage Association, the Canadian Signage Association, as well as the International Signage Association, and we discussed different regulations and bylaws across the world with respect to signage and trying to balance staff workloads. So during that discussion, what we realized is that it seems that in their best practices, that our model is the best model to manage all of these aspects, where we regulate through a bylaw in high level as to not create too much additional workload on staff. And then what we do is we incentivize great signage based on downtown core design guidelines. So how this would work is, as Lorraine had mentioned earlier, we have the community improvement plan, which does incentivize the development of signage. We only fund signage that meets the downtown core design guidelines. Our evaluation criteria is based on the downtown core design guidelines. So to bring that into context, I guess, there's a couple moving pieces here, right? We got some moving targets. We're in the middle of, we're going to start up an HCD study, which could ultimately roll into an HCD plan and change some of these regulations. Like Carl said, it could require some of these rules change in different bylaws, and not just things like the sign bylaw could roll into property standards bylaws and other bylaws that municipality administers. 2 is that because we incentivize this, that's what the downtown core design guidelines will do. So yes, there's differences in the document and it might seem like a miscommunications, but these are the standards we're holding people up to if they want money for their signs. And the standards in the bylaw are the ones that are regulated and that we enforce through the sign permit process. So good signage, heritage sympathetic signage, and something else I will still point out about that heritage bylaw, or that signage bylaw, is that if there is any alteration or disruption to an architectural feature, the MHC is still fully involved in an alteration process, regardless of the fact that it's a sign that remained in that bylaw. But yes, what they did was, or what we did as a group, I guess, was we removed backlit signage because there was still, after talking with the Signage Association, seeing a couple of examples, there was opportunity to entertain backlit signage in a more creative design. The cabinet signs that are fully enclosed square, fluorescent lighting with the inserts, we added a definition because those are often cited as the most undesirable forms of signage, and we made sure that that was prohibited in the downtown through the bylaw, not the guidelines.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense to me now. Any further questions or comments on this
I guess
topic?
my other comment is, from what I understand, we're not giving incentives to have more sympathetic, historic looking sign on the stores, which in my opinion, if we're going to be moving to a historic conservation district, Our signs should all be only rewarded if they fit what we want our downtown to look like. And I think the opposite has been happening, especially when we're adding backlit signs to already very modernistic signs.
I have a question. I don't know if I direct it to the chair first and then
Go right ahead.
with relating to the signage. So what happens if a building existing is what you consider
Can you just speak a little louder?
Oh.
There's something above my head and I can hardly hear you. I'm
sorry.
sorry.
I'm So with respect to modern buildings,
Thank you.
so what happens if the building is considered modern and doesn't necessarily have any heritage interest, but it's in the HCD and you're trying to regulate signage or lighting? How would you reconcile that? If it's not necessarily a heritage type building.
I guess from my perspective, I would say 80% of our buildings were historic buildings that have now very modernistic fronts.
Right.
So we're not rewarding and trying to get back to what we were hoping to have if we're allowing that to continue to be rewarded.
So you're suggesting,
I think we should have a signage bylaw and a booklet that allows them to see examples of how you can use wood and you can make beautiful heritage signs that then promote the whole concept of having a heritage downtown. That's my perspective anyway.
Thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Dorothy. I really appreciate the package you put together, Richard. I can't imagine it's easy when you're starting more or less from scratch based on the last one. Like there's a lot more here than there was in the last one, so
thank
it's
you.
a lot of content that's been created. I really like some of the details, like the cornice page and the roof lines. I like there's some good visual examples that are existing in town. Yeah, so it's exciting to get this because I do think it's going to be helpful for the HCD, and I think it's going to hopefully get integrated into more policy. And my preference would be it's more of a rule than a guideline eventually. But my comments for tonight are I'd like to see more visualization of architectural features, because I find with this kind of stuff, it's really hard for people to like they could be walking in a community that does a really good job of this, but it's hard to make it tangible. So for me, I'd find it helpful with just, more visual examples of architectural features. And for example, with the, like when I look at the Perth sign guideline document, they do a really good job of kind of generic visualizations of what it would look like in their HCD, what it would look like outside their HCD.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is just relevant to the downtown, but that kind of style I really like, because I feel...
Are they more graphic form or is it pictures?
It's kind of a combination of pictures and graphics, yeah. And I don't know if we could... I don't know how it works with that. If we could share graphics, or like, because they've already got it, but
That's a borrow and steal, but
yeah. But even if we have to pay for it, like let's find some money and pay someone to do it if we can't. The one thing on the Byward Market example, I think is great for the storefront display windows, but I don't know that the signage is really what we're looking for in our downtown, where it's a lot of those kind of flat board signs with the.
The thing with trying to find examples in Smith Falls or in general was that you'd find it have a good example of, say, shutters, but then the stone material would be the good choice. So there's no one example that typically has everything. And the issue with what I was struggling with using examples in Smith Falls is that I may highlight a problem that you don't necessarily highlight in the guidelines. You know, you have a business that looks really good, great storefronts, but the second story needs work. You know, so it would be just trying to balance between what you highlight and what you don't highlight.
Yeah.
So like graphics is a good example. We struggled with trying to find graphics that we could use because either we had to pay for them and we weren't necessarily set up at the time to have those resources, or we just didn't have any good examples that we're still looking for.
Yeah.
So like this, as you know, is a work in progress. And as we go forward, I hope to harmonize more of the other policy documents so that it kind of reflects what we're trying to achieve here.
And that, yeah, my other comment was on kind of on page 19 and 18 and 19, the example is like a big box example that doesn't make me think downtown.
No.
We can find, yeah, if I get the challenge behind that. my only other, my notes here, on page 13, it talks about cement board and under materials. And personally, I know for me, it's been controversial when we've had CIP applications wanting to put up the cement board because it's really just a high-end siding to me. And it doesn't have the same board and batten. So I'm not sure to have that as a guideline or have that as a recommendation for people to take out of this. I don't know that I'd support. And then my last comment on it was on the sustainable design, which I really like what's in the sustainable design.
Right.
But to me, that I'm wondering if there's a policy or there's something where that needs to be for the whole town.
It's possible that we could create something for the whole town. The thing is, the sustainable development's always changing. There's always new information out there about what's more appropriate. So it'd be interesting to see if it could be applicable to the wider town. But at this point, it's just simpler to just focus on downtown because that's where most of the, I guess, the interesting things people see first are happening.
And there's no equivalent policy for the rest of the town right now, I guess.
Or guidelines?
Some kind of sustainable development or sustainable design.
No, normal urban design is done at the building stage, personally, and it's usually up to the developer to decide whether or not he feels it's appropriate. I mean, we could have a guideline, but we don't have anything right now.
Sure.
Carl?
So the downtown core design guidelines, our authority and direction to establish those comes from official plan policies. The official plan highlights the downtown core as sort of an area where we want to focus on from design. But further to Councillor McGuire's comment, we're not limited to that. Council may choose to look at design guidelines for different parts of town or different sorts of things. Again, this isn't a mandatory document, it's a best practice, but that's if we identify different parts of town, say gateway areas or some other area that may look for that sort of assistance and guidance potentially associated with the CIP, then that can be a next step. I think this is a great step to get the process started, get the conversation working, but it doesn't limit us from having those conversations about other parts of town or about sort of broadening this a bit later. And further too, I just want to pick up on a comment that Lorraine had with respect to the Heritage Conservation District. Most of the HCDs I've seen categorize buildings or properties based on whether they're contributing or non-contributing properties. So they're either scored A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, or very contributing, non-contributing based on their heritage attributes. And there's a different series of policies and regulations and sort of a level of scrutiny involved. So property that's deemed to be non-contributing heritage, typically there'd be fewer requirements in terms of heritage approval. So that would go for perhaps some of those modern buildings. And when we were looking at these particular guidelines, I think that what we were trying to find that right balance between encouraging good heritage compatible signage while sort of balancing that with like what's a good sign to go on the Washburn block may not be a good sign to go on Dollar World or something like that. So without getting into too much prescriptive detail, I think that the intent was that through these guidelines is that sign design, just like any other design, should be respect the sort of the character of the original building. So I think that's sort of where we're attempting to strike that balance. And certainly we welcome MHC's feedback and anybody's feedback if something should be tweaked a little bit more.
Jenny?
Thank you. I just, I thought the content overall was really good, especially the comment about not filling in the arches of the windows.
Yes.
Yes. I really liked
I noticed that one too.
Just a question more about the process. Like, how does this get circulated to people? Is it just when they come in and they want a new sign, or they have an application for a renovation or something, or does it get circulated to all the property owners?
That's a good question. I know currently I have circulated this with the DBA, and so I'm basically going through review of that process right now. But I guess at the end, what happens with this document, I would imagine that, when there is, say, an applicant coming for CP funding, would mention the document. Anytime there's a moment where they're making an application to change something, that's when we mention that's available, as well as site plan and control applications as well.
Chris, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I guess just on the comment before Jenny's there, I guess the thing for me that I'm hoping that we see eventually is, and I think it's more the HCD than the design guidelines, is having that. Like I can think of a lot of other communities. Like there's a Shoppers Drug Mart. I can't think of the name of the town right now, but they had to put it on a masonry finish outside, and it just blends in better with the downtown. It's the same era as the one across the street here, but it fits in a lot better in their downtown core. I think of the Tim Hortons in Perth is a really good example. Just because buildings aren't old doesn't mean that they can't, through the use of generally higher materials and higher finishings, fit in better and do more to contribute to that cohesive style and feel in the downtown. But yeah, I get that we're limited as guidelines. It's always going to be a kind of an aspirational thing that people can aim towards, but they're not going to be required to do.
Do you want
I
to
would just, pardon? I was just saying that with respect to, let's say, the Shoppers, infill development would be under the same consideration for being compatible. So we would still be looking to make sure that it fits in within the surrounding environment. So like having cladding that's similar to the next building would be a recommendation for from the guidelines.
Well, thank you very much for the work you've done on this. It's wonderful to have all this written out there that, you know, with the fitting in with the current architecture and the heritage. So we look forward to seeing it when it's been revised again. Or is there anything you want from us at this point, Carl, or is it?
Yeah, so certainly appreciate the discussion. I think right now we're taking these draft guidelines, the DBA, a couple of other committees. So I realize this is a lot of content, a lot of information. So this is not the final discussion, but what we would be looking for any additional feedback from MHC members. If you can send that to staff within the next by the end of next week, that would be helpful, so we can piece together all of the comments. So I recognize we're certainly not going to get into all of the details today, but I invite you all to take a dive into it and send any additional follow-up comments to staff within the next week and a half, if possible.
All right, thank you. Lorraine, do you feel that we've covered the topic of the sign bylaw in our discussion?
I
Or do you-
didn't get this, or.
No, I mean, you
So
want.
I'm just looking at it now, and I think it's very good, and I apologize. I'm not sure why I didn't get it, and whether I just didn't, I don't know. But no, I think this document you've created is very good.
Thank you.
But I haven't had a chance to actually really read it carefully because I just am looking at it now, but
Maybe in a
does
week's
look
time.
very good.
Maybe in a week's time.
No, it does look very good, and especially, you know, the examples of some things, you know, that you're attributing to make that building wonderful, like the just trying to, this one, the design of the running along on top of the building is an example of a cornice that's distinctive. I mean, that's lovely. I mean, that building is beautiful. So I think highlighting those things for people and promoting them is a really good aspect for us to be doing, you know, because a lot of times I think people think it's not affordable, but I think that there's so many benefits for it. So yeah, no, it's good. It looks good. I will look forward to reading it more carefully.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, will we move on to the next item on the agenda then, which would be Carl's report on the Rideau Regional Centre. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report was actually it was interesting to write and to research. I'm glad I had the chance to do it. But I'm following up on some discussion that around the committee earlier a couple of months ago. There's a lot of discussion about the Rideau Regional and the Gallipo Center, what the future holds for that property, and really what the various roles are that we as the town have as well as others. So staff investigated in a little bit more detail sort of the background and the context which brought us to where we're at right now. At the end of the day, there's not a significant role for the municipality right now. So when the property was owned by the province and had provincial heritage sort of provincial heritage values identified and recognized. The lands were eventually, when the Rideau Regional was sold and conveyed now to a third party, one of the conditions of that ultimate sale was that they enter into a heritage trust, and that, or sorry, a heritage easement with the heritage trust, and that is one of the authorities granted to the heritage trust under the Heritage Act. And the heritage easement is a document. It's a binding document registered on title that identifies the heritage attributes of the property and sort of establishes a few, I guess, zones, if I can call them that, and identifies what those features are within those zones and identifies development and works that can happen without the approval of the trust, that can just happen as a right, but then also what needs the approval of the Heritage Trust. And the expectation is as the site hopefully redevelops or gets redevelops in the coming years, is that the Heritage Trust would be sort of one of the partners through that process. So there are municipal planning policies in place for the property. They're not directly linked to the heritage easement. The town is not a party to the heritage easement, but they're collaborative with the heritage easement. So the official plan at a very high level recognizes the integrity and value of the site and create some very, very high level policies that sort of guide development to different parts of the land. But ultimately the official plan does not allow development to occur outside of, with a few exceptions, generally does not allow development to occur outside the ring road because it's identified as a development reserve, that we don't need these lands. So I think in time, as we amend our official plan, and we're in the process of doing that, council will have the opportunity to consider opening up that development reserve outside the ring road to accommodate potentially future development. We're not there yet, but that's going to be one of the things that council will have the opportunity to look at. We also have a development permit bylaw. That's essentially that's a planning tool that basically replaces zoning and site plan approval. Those are the sort of the planning tools, the traditional planning tools that apply across the rest of the town, and that breaks the property into, again, a series of zones with specific development provisions associated with each one, and they're collaborative with. They borrow some of the terminology from the heritage easement, but again, we're not a party to that. So at this point, I think in time there will be as council looks at a new or amended official plan, the Gallipo Center lands and other lands in town are going to be sort of those next frontiers of development where we look and potentially explore the development of lands outside of the ring road. We don't know what that's going to look like. We expect that there's going to be involvement with the Heritage Trust, of course. And as an example for that, one of the things that the Heritage Trust looks to protect is that alleyway. So the grand entrance into the Rideau Regional Center opens up into a ring road around it. That's fairly iconic. Unfortunately, some of the trees there are ash trees and they didn't survive the emerald ash borer, but that is somewhat iconic. That is valued under the heritage easement, and certainly in my view as the staff who's going to be leading the planning process, I would love to see sort of that intent, that conveyance carried forward. But those are conversations that will be happening at a later date. But at this point, there is no formal statutory municipal role on the heritage end. It doesn't mean that won't end up being the case at some point in the future. But right now, the municipal planning and land use regulation and the heritage protection aspect are they're administered by different authorities. So that's this report was presented for committee's information, and certainly any questions or discussion, I'd welcome that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any comments or questions regarding Jenny?
Thank you. I don't know a whole lot about easements. I'm just curious, like, it could be designated under both, right? It could have Ontario Heritage Act designation and an easement? Is that true? Do you know?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't see that there's anything excluding the municipality from designating the property if that's council's wish. I'm not sure if there'd be a jurisdictional issue if the easement and the municipal designation, if there's some aspect in that contradict each other, or if a municipal designation bylaw can be sort of complementary or build upon. Those are the sort of things that would need to be investigated, but I don't see structurally that we can't have a municipal designation as well.
Okay, thank you. And Chris?
Thanks, Dorothy. Thanks a lot, Carl. I appreciate it's a lot of good information in here, and I had no idea it was put out into different zones. I'm wondering, what could we get a copy of the easement, or is that something that's publicly available, or is it like a designation where there's a package that outlines the features?
Go ahead.
I am 99 through you, Madam Chair. I am 99% certain that the easement, being an instrument that's registered on title, is public. We will verify that with the Ontario Heritage Trust, and assuming that confirmation is received, I can share that with the Municipal Heritage Committee. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and just, I guess, to follow up on that, I'd love to read it, know what's protected, what's not protected, and then understand if the easement was to be modified, what the process is, or if there's a duty to consult the community, or because even though it's at a provincial level, you'd still hope that there'd be some kind of local consultation. And I think then that's where the MHC maybe could have an opportunity to submit feedback if that were to happen.
Right.
Does the easement, or did the easement name certain buildings that would then be designated, or there's nothing in it? Just, you're saying that was just the entranceway that was named as something that was going to be protected, or no? Like Chris, I'd really like to read it. I think it would be interesting. Go ahead.
Yep. So
Dorothy, can you go ahead?
Yes.
So further to Chris's question, I'll add that question in the event that the easement, when I reach out to the OHT, if there is the conversation about changing it. I don't believe there is a statutory role for them to involve the municipality, but I agree with you. It is certainly the neighborly thing to do, and I think helps build credibility in the entire process. So I'll have that verification. And to your comment, Lorraine, yes, individual buildings and architectural features on individual buildings are identified in zones and reference. So the administration building, some of that Art Deco.
Hospital area, where the nurses lived, and there was a whole nurses building that was, I think, just as it was when it was built.
Yes.
At least the last time. I mean, we all drive around it just to, to see how it looks, and so many of them are just as they've always been on the outside. I mean, I know there's probably changes on the inside, but.
So this will come back to another meeting when there's more information. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I'll look to the committee for direction. Certainly I have a couple of questions to ask the Heritage Trust, and I can either follow up with the committee by email or bring an update if that's the wish of the chair as well.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions or? Okay. We'll move on to Mary's report. The terms of reference changes for citizen youth members.
I don't suspect this will take long. Carl touched based on this last month. So we did receive legal counsel advice that suggested that we do have some options to include youth participation on advisory committees. So given that the MHC plays an advisory role in advice council, who's ultimately the decision-making role, youth at this level would have more of a voice in politics than they would at the council level because they are not of age of majority to vote. So based on the legal advice we have received, I have drafted some redline revisions to the committee's terms of reference. These redline revisions are consistent with what the CPWG, which is a climate protection working group, has requested that their updates look like. And it's also consistent with what I believe council had looked at this past Monday for the Smiths Falls for All. It's just in slightly different format depending on the departments. But yes, so basically today I'm just looking to see if the committee has any support or if they have any changes that they would like to make to this document or any questions before we bring this to council next Monday to see if they're willing to adopt. If it is adopted by council, we would look to recruit 2 youth participants. To be clear, this would be 2 youth above and beyond your existing membership so that it doesn't take away from the membership that you have now.
Jenny?
Thank you. I think it's a fantastic idea. Is there any opportunity if the person becomes 18, is there any opportunity for them just to become an adult member, or do they have to go through the process again?
I don't believe they would have to go through the process again, as long as they're already appointed by council. That being said, there would have to be a vacancy in the regular membership for them to continue. So as long as there's a vacancy, I don't see any issue with that, and then you wouldn't have to start the process over.
Chris?
Yeah, no, I'm really excited for this, and I hope we can find some people. I'm wondering, it says upon a successful recruitment of new youths, the committee is delegated authority to appoint new youth members as they deem appropriate. So my question was kind of in the same train as Jenny's of why is it different, and what does that mean? Are they still full voting
With the
members?
fact that you're able to appoint them at your level?
Yeah.
So basically that's to accommodate turnover. As youth maybe reach their volunteer hours needed for the secondary school diploma, or as they reach age of majority, let's say, there's a chance that, or go to school, there's a chance that they will move on more easily than regular members. So to accommodate more frequent turnover and to reduce workload at a council level, legal counsel has advised that we are able to delegate the authority to appoint new youth members at this level. So this committee would have the power to appoint a new youth in the event that one of our youth have moved on.
But they're still full voting members of the committee.
They're still what, sorry?
They're still full voting quorum members of the committee.
Yes, they're still full voting members of the committee. So they'd have all the same rights and powers, just basically on the fact that this committee plays an advisory role and that their decisions don't hold legal standing.
Interesting. And then, yeah, sorry, my other question was, are we limited to 16, or could we go as low as 14, or?
So the legal advice we received suggested that the lowest we go is age 16. And frankly, I don't have a lot of context on that, so I'm not sure if that's from an insurance standpoint or WSIB. I apologize.
Okay, any more comments?
I just was going to ask Chris, I thought we had grade 8 students before, didn't we?
I don't know. I thought we had grade 10 students for the student counselor before, but.
I mean, I think it's a great idea, and it's always good to hear what young people are thinking about, our town and what we're doing here. The age, I'm curious, because I thought they were grade 8, but maybe they were 9. Don't know. I don't think the age is a big factor. I think that perhaps someone that's older may have just more. They're closer to what they're going to do, so this may impact and help them figure out. Maybe they want to become a planner or a mayor, or who knows.
An architect.
An architect.
An architectural historian.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, through the chair, actually, that's exactly what I was going to say. So the work that happens at this level, like at this committee, these heritage preservation efforts, what we need to remember is that this generation that's growing up, they're the ones who are going to most benefit from our heritage preservation efforts. And yes, my absolute hope is that we get some student who wants to pursue architecture or is a historian. So ideally, we have somebody who's passionate in this, and this helps them pursue their life passion.
So we've been asked to support the changes to the terms of reference by way of a motion. We'll do that today.
Sorry?
Would you like us to do that today? A motion?
If you don't mind, that way I can actually take it to council on Monday to see if they support it as well.
Okay, so I'd like somebody to move that the MHC supports the changes to the terms of reference as proposed in order to include youth members on our committee. Does that sound right? Would somebody move that then, please? Lorraine will move it, and a seconder? Jenny? Do we want to discuss it further, or we're okay to vote? So all in favor of that? Okay, passed. Thank you. Now, heritage education events and initiatives is the next item on the agenda. Heritage Week is February 19th to 25th next year. And Mary and I have been working on a Heritage Highlights project, which is going to be on the website. I'll ask you to speak to the website, Mary.
I can do that. I just wanted to document the motion before I forgot it. So yes, so these heritage highlights are going to serve a dual purpose. So first and foremost, the reason why I didn't post them with the agenda is because I want this to become available to the public when they are refined, not when they are currently in draft form. So they are going to serve dual purpose. The first purpose is going to be to go on to our new Heritage webpage that is going to have a couple of cool things on it that I'm hoping to introduce. So not just our Heritage register, which by legislation we're required to post, but I'm also hoping to have a form for new nominations for Heritage designations, so we can actually have the public nominate properties that they wish for us to look into for designations. And then, highlight some of the cool things that the MHC is doing, amongst other things. And the Heritage Highlights is one of those components. So I'm hoping to have a little bit of a carousel, which in web creator terms is essentially a window that switches slides every minute or two so that people can review and find out about some of our heritage properties. But let's say I say heritage properties, but properties that have heritage value that aren't essentially designated, and showing to the community how much heritage value we really have in our downtown area. And it would be part of that informative piece that we have talked about through the HCD. The second purpose it would serve is, as you would recall in the past, during Heritage Week, which happens the third week of February, we've also done what I had previously called the Heritage Blasts, where we had a post each day during Heritage Week that was like, hey, we're highlighting this property and the heritage of this property. So that was a very well-received program. We got a lot of very good feedback from the public on social media. So the idea is that we would also use those again and post on social media each day throughout Heritage Week, that third week of February. So it does need some refining still, and I know there's a few errors in it, but yes, I'm looking for feedback, looking for committee support before we try to bring this live.
I love it. I think it's a great idea.
We deliberately chose properties that were newest additions to the properties of interest list to start out with, but the idea is to highlight as many of these heritage properties as possible that we believe will be included in the conservation district. So just bringing it into the attention of the public.
And just adding that little bit of history. A lot of people walk by these buildings and may not really know it was an armory or it was something else, So adding that, I think, is a big thing. And, people will maybe go by and say, oh yeah, I get it. That's why that building's like that.
And we've got photos from before and current. So
Yes,
historic photos.
there is some historical photos missing for two of them. The Heritage House Museum was not able to muster it up. You will notice on the bottom of the blurb of the two that we do not have historical photos. I invite members of the public to reach out if they do have historical photos, because we want to hear from them.
Yes, so that will, when do you think that will be out there?
Well, there was a few things that came up in November that pushed the timeline back a bit, unfortunately. But yes, no later than the beginning of January. I want this launched before we get into the HCD. I want the message out there to the community, so there's plenty of heritage information for the community to find and review.
And how long would you keep the same properties before we put more on?
Well, I was thinking no more than a year. Right. So, and I mean, that might be too long, but what I'm saying is in terms of staff workload, we haven't discussed work planning in the department yet. So that's something that we can discuss next week during that work planning meeting and discuss how I can incorporate that into my work plan. If the committee has a desired time frame that we're switching them regularly, I would welcome feedback on that. We can do our best to incorporate.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions about that? Okay, so the other subject under education, heritage education, is an idea for Heritage Week itself.
Yes. Would you like me to speak to that too?
Sure.
Okay. So Dorothy and I, during our meeting on the Heritage Highlights, we were discussing a little bit about the Heritage initiatives. It was on the agenda last month, but we were kind of grasping at straws in order to come up with an idea. So admittedly, this is strategically placed on the agenda this evening because we just discussed youth membership. One of the things we were brainstorming about was the idea of an essay writing contest for the age group that we're actually looking to fill some of these seats here. And giving them that opportunity to give us a small report, I don't know, maybe 500 words about the history of their favorite property in Smith Falls and awarding them during Heritage Week. So Dorothy and I did discuss the idea of potentially doing some form of education bursary. We as a municipality do not have that option, unfortunately. So we would have to find some other form of prize that would entice this age category in order to write an essay that's not needed for classes in school. But the idea of the program is that this helps in more ways than one. One, it could gain interest from the students at the high school to fill some of these seats and help with the work of the committee. Two, it could also help us gain connections and research and everything that we might not already have, right? So it allows us to create, maybe there's more connections in town than what we realized, and we're able to find a new stream of information of more heritage in town, or maybe they muster up information that we never knew about. But students do have their innovative brains and ability to research, and you never know what will come out on the other side. So I think there's a benefit on more than one side for this.
Okay. Yes, and so do we have other ideas for Heritage Week at the same time, or did you?
I think those are great. I'm excited. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of that. Research whether and we will get many people doing it. I don't know.
We might get it could even be a student who lives in a house where there's history to that house that
Yes, that's
that
true.
we don't know about, that it doesn't exist in the written record already. Yeah, that would be interesting. So we just have to decide the practicality of that, Mary, and how we're going to actually implement it, right?
Yes, I'm going to actually implement it. So, but just to confirm, like, the committee is supportive of the essay contest, because I'm just saying up here, what I was thinking was that we would launch that and start publicizing in the new year in order to be able to announce a winner during Heritage Week as kind of like a good news story during that week and really highlight it versus launching the contest that week and having the award later.
It might be a good idea, Mary, too, to contact the English teachers at the high school, because they might look at this as an opportunity for them to, direct the kids and get them to kind of give them some advice. And
I agree. History teachers as well, right?
Sure,
So
like write an
definitely
essay
reaching out
with,
to the high schools is something.
yeah,
how to write an essay with, references, bibliography at the end, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Have certain criteria and requirements. What I can do is, while I'm preparing the webpage, I can highlight some of the requirements that an essay needs to meet to qualify for the contest, and I can circulate it to the committee. You can just give me feedback by email if you have anything that you feel that I'm missing.
Okay. So I get the impression that the committee's in favor of this project, so we'll go ahead with that. So one more item on the agenda, and that's project update for the area study for the HCD.
Thank you. So just a quick update. We've received 3 proposals to undertake the Heritage Conservation District study. Those proposals have been reviewed by staff, and a preferred proponent who scored the highest has been identified, and we're expecting to bring that to reviewed by staff as well as your very own Jenny Davis on behalf of this committee, and we're proposing to bring that recommendation forward to council for consideration and potential award on next Monday.
Anything to add to that, Jenny?
I thought it was a very interesting process. I thought we had a very thoughtful conversation. It was kind of fun to work through each, figure out pros and cons. I thought it was good.
No, and we have some pretty solid proposals too. I was very encouraged by what I saw and what was presented, and I really appreciate it was reviewed by myself, by Mary, by Jenny, and by the Director of Community Services, and everyone brought a very different perspective to the scoring, to the evaluation, and at the end of the day, we try to develop a bit of a consensus based, and I think we're all very close in what we came up with.
Was there any indication of a timeline from the submission as to when they would begin, when they might be?
So the expectation is once we award the contract, I think we'd touch base before Christmas. I'm not sure that there'd be a whole lot of work that would happen before the new year, but I think the first couple of weeks, once we award the contract, we'll be setting up that kickoff meeting, getting them as much information as possible, and sort of developing the scope, the communication plan. So there's a couple of the two, I guess the two shortlisted bidders. The one we're recommending is proposing a 10-month timeline to do the study, and again another 10 for the plan. The other very solid contender we have is proposing, I think, about 12 months to do each of those. So I think one's a little faster than the other, but they're relatively congruent with each other. But I think just to emphasize, of course, we did ask for far more than the bare minimum in terms of public consultation. In talking to anybody about a heritage conservation district, is consult early, consult often, get ahead of the process, let people know what this is about and what it doesn't do, and then that will help a smoother process move forward.
Okay, thank you. Do we need to discuss the work plan, do you think? That's
No, I just give that to you every month with new updates on it.
Okay, just for, all right. So round table, does anyone have anything for round table? No? Okay, good.
I have something.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I know that it's a little early, but I appreciate everything everybody has done this year, and we're looking into a new and exciting year for this group, so I hope you're ready for it because we got a lot of work coming.
Thank you. Yes, and I see the next meeting. I was wondering about that, because would it not have been the 2nd, or?
Oh,
It's January 9th.
2nd is the day that staff return to the office.
Right, so it wouldn't
So
have
I
worked.
would suggest January 9th would be best. If there's any conflict, please let me know and we can try to adjust. But I do suggest that we have a January meeting, given that Heritage Week is in February.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, and we couldn't meet the first Tuesday, obviously, because staff wouldn't have been here to prepare the materials. So that's okay with everybody, the 9th? All right. Well then, we're done. If somebody would move that we adjourn. Chris, thank you. Meeting adjourned.